Oh, geez. Greetings, friends. Today I'm going to talk about how women are inquisitive and the strategies I use to withhold important information from them while distracting or confusing them and not letting them know that I'm deliberately refusing to answer their questions. And let me be clear, I do this out of necessity because having a big mouth around women can get you into serious trouble. But before I do that, I thought I'd start us off with a little story about something that happened to me a few days ago. It's not related to women's inquisitiveness, but it does relate to the subject of urban men. A few days ago, I went on a nice bike ride to the other side of the city. On my way back, I was moving at a good speed down a residential street with another cyclist just in front of me, and in front of us was a car driving along. So to be clear, the three of us were all going the same direction on this residential street. The car was continuing through an intersection just as I and the other cyclist arrived at the intersection. And me and the other cyclist, we didn't stop. We just kept going through the stop sign. And this is what I call following the stream. You know, the car in front of us has created a stream of movement, and depending on the circumstances, we ought to continue with that flow. Stop signs be damned. And so we went through this intersection, and of course I saw that there was a black car waiting for us to pass, and we possibly delayed him by 3 or 4 seconds. The driver in this black car was this white guy with black sunglasses, and he was clearly unhappy and glaring at me. And he shouted out, "Yeah, there's a stop sign, guys," as we approached, and then he shouted again as we passed, "Yeah, there's a stop sign, guys." And his voice was really whiny. And I noticed that he was a pasty dude with a black and blue checkered short-sleeved shirt, and though he was sitting down, which makes it harder to judge his size, he must have been a fair bit shorter than me, and he looked to be in his mid-20s. I mean, I'm not the biggest guy in the world. I mean, I'm an ectomorphic guy, but I was maybe a fair bit taller than this guy. So, the thing is, after I passed back, I saw that he was turning right, turning onto the same road and going to be passing by me in just a few seconds. So I had I had the moment to prepare. We might have a little conversation coming up. So right as he drove by me, I turned and both of his windows were open, which is that's good for communication. So I just turned and I was like, "Fuck you, you fucking hipster! You fucking Metro! Yeah, nice plaid shirt. I like the style." And the guy was really speechless. He didn't know what to say. His only thing he said was, "What? I ride my bike every other day, and I always respect the stop signs." And then the dude was like actually trying to run me off the road. He actually got about 6 inches away from me, and I knew he was trying to intimidate me. But I wasn't afraid of this guy at all. At that point, we went our separate ways, and that was probably for the best. And so that was the end of it. But my initial suspicion that this was a weak man was confirmed. I mean, that dude's been following the rules his whole life, so he wants other people to be in line as well. He could have shouted something back at me, perhaps something more witty. It's not like what I shouted at him was so witty. Or he could have just, ignored me and drove on. I mean, that would have shown a certain strength too, as in, he's unaffected. He doesn't care. But no, this dude cared a lot about the fact that I disrespected him, enough so that he momentarily flirted with the idea of, running me off the road with his car. And, anyways, this is just one reason in a long list of reasons why I'm very pessimistic about urban men. And, I'm an urban man myself. But, I feel very alone in this city. It's like all of these freaking urban men who are, somewhat, maybe degenerate is kind of a strong word, but it's like they haven't developed into healthy men. They haven't developed into the, their full capacity. Maybe that's my opinion. Anyways, I know that's a tangent. Let me get back to the main topic here. Women are naturally inquisitive. I suppose some men might be inquisitive of other men, but that seems a little odd to me. I mean, unless men have a good reason to be inquisitive, it's an annoying, non-masculine trait to be constantly asking other people about their plans and their private lives, especially when the person asking you is someone you don't know that well. It's a bit different if a good friend asks you something personal, but even my good friends don't usually do that. I mean, why would they? If a guy has a habit of asking another guy personal questions, for example, whether he has a girlfriend, then the second guy should tell the first guy to get a fucking life. Why on earth is that something he's interested in knowing? What difference would it make to talk about this? But I don't think too many men are inquisitive like that. I mean, I hope not. Generally, it's women who are the gatherers of information, or to be more specific, they're the gatherers of social information. Partly, women just like conversation. Often, it doesn't matter what you discuss with them, but the fact is that women tend to ask you about personal matters which tend to be important for you, because this information will give women an idea of where you stand socially and also where you stand economically. Women are inquisitive because they want to know which men are powerful and which men are weak, which men have money and which men don't. Many would say that women's inquisitive nature is a survival strategy. I mean, I'd agree, I guess. I mean, that's not to say I necessarily think women evolved that way. You know, evolution is a murky collection of 8 or 9 statements about reality, some of which have good foundation and some of which have no foundation, such as the notion that all life developed from a chemical soup. If you've heard of real scientists and not science fiction writers creating life from dead matter, I mean, please let me know. But anyways, I'm getting off on a tangent again. In the past, I would reveal matters to women which I really shouldn't have revealed. I mean, afterwards I'd regret it. Especially the time when I was denied life insurance. I mean, that was when I was in my early 20s, very naive. And the female agent who interviewed me on the phone got me to open up about, you know, using drugs and traveling a lot. I could have just omitted that information. I could have lied. But that information, you know, was evidently enough to be denied the coverage. So to be honest, I couldn't care less about the life insurance itself, because it's not like I have any dependent people, you know, who like, you know, I don't have any kids, I'm not married, so it's not like that's such a big deal. But at the same time, you know, it kind of stung, because I realized that it was a significant matter, and in any case, I realized that I'd been taken advantage of. So, you know, I've been taken advantage of by this very cheerful woman on the phone. They can get you to open up, so you have to be wary about that. In the past, I used to think that being honest with women could make them understand what I understand. And I'm not saying this applies to the agent for the insurance company. I'm just saying more generally, like, you know, sometimes if you think something you understand and you want a woman to understand it, that's kind of a false hope. Fortunately for me, I realized after a time that, you know, it's not true. You can't make women understand what you understand. That's just not true. It will never be true. Women can't have compassion towards men. That's not cynical of me. I'm actually not cynical. I'm not distressed by this. I don't necessarily think that this is, you know, that the world, something's wrong with the world that women behave like that. That's just female nature. That's not in their capacity to have compassion for men. I mean, I don't hate women. I had a very loving relationship with my mother, who died from cancer when I was 20, which was obviously very upsetting for me. But a mother's love isn't exactly the same as compassion. Compassion is about sympathy, which involves the harmony of feeling naturally existing between persons of like tastes or opinion or of congenial dispositions. Sympathy is also defined as the fact or power of sharing the feelings of another, especially in sorrow or trouble. You might call sympathy fellow feeling. So your mother may love you, but she doesn't have the capacity to see things from your point of view. Men can be sympathetic, though obviously not all men are. How can a man do it? How can he be sympathetic? I mean, how can he imagine himself in the position of another man? Or a woman, isn't that strange? Or even an animal? I mean, it's a good question. How you know, sympathy is a good question. It's kind of a strange thing. It doesn't quite fit into that rational worldview, I'd say. I mean, it's a good question, so I'm not going to attempt to answer that in this video. But I think the capacity for sympathy in man has to do with some implicit awareness that all beings are divine, no matter their flaws. But it's a painful sympathy for men. It's a painful sympathy because we only feel it alone. This is something we only come to understand alone. Perhaps we may even pity other people, pity other women and other less fortunate beings, though pity is somewhat different from sympathy. It's a bit more negative connotation to it. So some men, they come to this bitter realization, this red pill. They may see the utility in sharing deeply sensitive information with women, As of course, you shouldn't share sensitive information with anyone beyond your most trusted friends, in my opinion. But specifically, when it comes to women, you can't expand their minds to see things as you do, and you cannot expect sympathy from them. So why do we men often open up so easily to women? Well, first of all, because we haven't been educated the way the MGTOW community is educating young men these days. Second of all, it can feel good to open up to women during the moment, almost like a drugging effect where you become more loose with information. Third, opening up to women can boost our esteem, but of course the feeling is temporary. However, you have a lot more to lose in this situation than to gain. Being loose with personal information can have very bad consequences. If you're in a close relationship and a woman becomes aware of your actual financial worth, and perhaps she also discovers what your salary is, oh, then that's extremely bad. She could use that as a psychological lever against you. She could shame you into giving her more money or paying for this and that. Thankfully, I've wisened up and I no longer reveal such sensitive information to women. I would never date a woman who had any idea what my actual worth is. But even if you go MGTOW, there are still situations where you'll have to interact with inquisitive women. I've noticed that it takes some craftiness to manage the interaction smoothly. Normally, if you're in public, you can normally ignore women in public if you don't have any specific reason to be talking to them. If you work in an office with female employees, well, that's a bit different, of course. You might have to be passive-aggressive in something like the way Sandman describes. Luckily for me, I've never had to work in a place like that. Well, not an office. I did work in 2 museums, and one of those museums was dominated by females, including my 2 bosses, who came one after the other. I didn't actually have to deal with any inquisitiveness there, though, since my first boss was an alpha female who just wanted to get out of there, and my second boss was a neurotic culinary historian. Yes, a culinary historian who talked to herself, and she was just a terrible person to work with, but to her credit, she wasn't actually all that inquisitive. But most women aren't like that. Let me tell you about an inquisitive woman I know. She's my dental hygienist. You know, the person who cleans your teeth. Just to be clear, she's not the dentist. The dentist at the practice happens to be a man, and all of his employees are women. The dentist, like I said, he's a man. And this lady, she cleans my teeth. She has a Eastern European accent, but I believe she must have been in Canada for at least 10 years. I don't know for sure exactly. I know she has a daughter, and I don't recall her ever mentioning a husband. I suppose dental hygienists tend to be talkative people, but that's good because otherwise it's kind of awkward when someone gets that close to you. You know, the thing is, being talkative can mean being inquisitive, but there's actually no reason it has to mean being inquisitive. In fact, many kinds of people are friendly, many kinds of people are prone to engage in conversation, while they actually avoid, topics related to your personal affairs. But this Eastern European woman likes to ask me about what I'm doing in Africa, why I go there, what do I do there, what do I do in Toronto, am I married, who knows what else. She also sometimes offers advice to me, or kind of more forceful advice, like you should do this, like the time she advised me to get married before it's too late. I suppose part of the problem is that she's been cleaning my teeth for a number of years now, and in the past I was more open with her. Nowadays I'm much more wary of opening up to women, but if you suddenly try to withhold information from someone that's developed as an acquaintance for you, they might really freak out. Not freak out, but they would react very poorly to that. So you might have to be a bit more crafty about it. So I'll get into that later. So you need to have some sort of strategy, unless you want things to be awkward, or dare I say even hostile. And that's really unfortunate that things have to be hostile just because we're trying to protect ourselves. And we don't mean anything negative to anyone else. Anyways, having a strategy is useful. I find that sometimes if a woman asks me a specific question, then I can respond in a diagonal direction. So let's say she asks me how much money it cost me to build this house in Ghana that I sometimes talk about. Well, I'd say something like, well, you'd be surprised at how much certain materials cost. Don't get me started about windows. They have to come from China. Actually, all the specialty materials come from overseas, yada, 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 blah, blah, blah. and I'm just confident and I'm having a good time talking and it's flowing. And in that context, I would be very surprised to see this hypothetical woman pressing me on the question of how much the house costs, because I actually didn't say a goddamn thing about money. So yeah, I mean, they've gotten their attention. They've had an emotional benefit. You've acquired information, which women always like to do. Yes, I gave them good information, some real details. Perhaps you might even judge me for being too open. Maybe that's not smart, but in my mind, those details aren't important ones. So you can use them as a smokescreen to send them off your track. I tricked them because I didn't give them anything important about me. And even then, who's to say the other things I said are actually true? There are some women at my local bank who sometimes ask me about my activities overseas. This is somewhat inevitable because I have to deal with them to make wire transfers. As you can imagine, most bank tellers are women. That's quite common. Sometimes when large sums of money are involved, it can be smoother if you let the bank know that you're just doing business, especially because there's a lot of fraud going on in Africa, so sometimes banks need to ask you some questions. In the past, I told them I was starting a volunteer organization, which technically I basically was. It's not necessarily dangerous for me to be open about this, but I've since realized that talking about volunteering around women isn't such a good idea. It's too interesting for them. They might want to know more. You tell them it's a business, they think it's a charity. I mean, it's literally like you say business, they hear charity. No, so I don't mention the volunteer organizations these days. I might just say, oh, we're raising animals, we're doing agriculture. But I don't like that these women know how much money is in my checking account. At least they know when I meet them and they have the information on the screen in front of them. I mean, clearly, I would have to be extremely careful if I ever met one of these women in another place. They're completely and irrevocably compromised by having this knowledge of me. I've probably even spoken too much to them about my businesses already. I mean, look, I'm not perfect. I can still fall into this trap myself. But generally, I've learned a lot, and I handle myself much more securely and effectively around women these days. And I hope other men can too. Knowing these conversational techniques are not a form of dancing, as I've heard the term used in the MGTOW community. I understand dancing to mean the pathetic things men have to do to win the favor of women in today's Western society. The conversational techniques I'm describing might bear some resemblance to dancing because they're an art form, but the resemblance ends there. Conversational techniques applied with an awareness of female psychology is simply a way to manage your interactions with women without giving up anything important to them, and at the same time not making it clear that you're trying to hide anything from them. Even if you don't give a logical answer, if your response is expressive, especially if you go on talking, which can be distracting, women are often satisfied because it gives them a good feeling, the recognition that you paid attention to them and you responded to them, even though, of course, you didn't really answer their question. Now, to be clear, many women are going to see through this tactic and they'll demand you actually answer their questions. But that sort of woman might be your partner in a relationship. And if you're MGTOW, you shouldn't really be dealing with that in the first place. When dealing with women who you don't know very well, the sort of women you're only interacting with in a public or a work-related setting, then it's easier to ignore their sensitive questions. And as I said, generally, the way to do this is by simply talking. Preferably the more the better. Though I haven't really attempted this myself, I sometimes wonder if you could respond to women's specific questions by not even diagonally approaching their queries, but rather just talking about something entirely different. Like, for example, some lady asks you, "What's your address? Who are your closest friends?" And you respond by talking about the weather or some historical topic. But the thing is that you preface it by saying, "Thank you for bringing that up. I've been thinking about all sorts of things along those lines," yada, yada, yada. You get into your topic about the weather or history or whatever. And that preface is important because saying thank you shows that you're really being considerate. And she gets an emotional rise from that because you're being caring. And who knows if this tactic would really work? I don't know. But I'd wager that if you're a fluid talker and you pull something like this, many women will even forget what they asked you. Often the way it works in an interaction with women in public or at work is that they want a feedback loop of information, and it doesn't always matter what the information is. I mean, that could change, of course, depending on who the particular woman is and what they're trying to get from you. But I think women are distracted a lot of the time by their own thoughts. I'm saying they're not as impressionable. And impressionable has a negative connotation, but it's kind of a vague word. It means easily impressed or easily influenced, which you can take to mean you lack a backbone and you lack willpower, but in a positive light, it could also mean you're perceptive to reality and you're listening to what experience is telling you and you have an ability to expand your worldview. I mean, who wouldn't want to be impressed from time to time? It's like being able to marvel at something, to perceive something amazing. You can teach adolescent males that men have walked on the moon, and their reaction is going to be, whoa, that's incredible. At least, I hope that would be the reaction. And these adolescent males, upon learning that, they'll be affected by this knowledge forever. Well, maybe not all men, admittedly, but, those of us who are, functioning properly, but because we're impressionable. But I doubt females are impressionable like that. And, when they hear of men walking on the moon, and again, to them they might just think, oh, it's men doing that, so. But anyways, it doesn't matter. When they hear of that happening, I just don't think they're affected by that in the same way. It's kind of beyond their capacity for thought. And sure, I did briefly know a woman who was an astronaut, she wasn't your average woman, I can tell you that much. She's still a woman, though, and she was an astronaut, but she didn't walk on the moon. She spent time in Earth's orbit, like all the other astronauts. So nobody's walked on the moon in a while. So remember, if you give up important information to women, you're putting yourself at risk because they may very well use this information against you. They could simply be trying to influence you, but in some cases they may try to blackmail you or even destroy you. So maybe not all women will act in that manner, but that risk is always there because the female psychology, the female nature just is what it is. You don't have to hate it, it just is what it is. So, the other aspect of being loose with information is that maybe the women themselves will not have malevolent intentions, but they will inevitably gossip, and thereby they will pass this information on towards someone who does mean you harm. And of course, at this point, you may now be dealing with other men, enemies. Usually these are weak and jealous men. It could be men who work for the state, just as could be women who work for the state, other more unforgiving women. In a country like Ghana, the people you want to keep in the dark are just those numerous people in town, practically everyone really, who want to just get something from you for nothing. The very people who smile and greet you warmly and then later badmouth you. I'm good at smiling and it disarms people in general. This is especially useful to me when I'm overseas in Ghana and people are being very inquisitive and perhaps I may be dealing with a police officer or a government official. Being able to smile at a moment's notice, regardless of your opinion about the person standing in front of you, is an extremely useful ability. The smile has to be genuine, though. You have to take a comedic look on life and find humor in stressful situations. But having said that, if you practice smiling, it's bound to become more natural to you over time, and you'll actually find yourself in a better mood. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you should bend over backwards in life and take shit all the time. Quite the contrary. I think we need to stand up for ourselves as men. I'm just saying you have to be smarter than people. You have to be a few steps ahead of them. Well, that's all I have to say for now. Hope you found that helpful. Feel free to share your own strategies for dealing with inquisitive women in the comments section. Hasta luego, amigos!